Now, onwards to our next panel on changing roles and responsibilities across the value chain. And I'm delighted to introduce our panel moderator, Suzanne McElligott, the CEO of IB Ireland and a board member of IB Europe. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to moderate this great panel, and it is my pleasure to introduce my panelists. First off, Andreas Antrup, VP Advertising at Zalando, Stevan Randjelovic, Director Brand Safety and Digital Risk at GroupM, Oliver Whitten, COO at Adform, Benjamin Dick, Senior Director Product, Privacy, Identity and Data at IB Tech Lab, and Stefanie Scognamiglio, Director Solutions Consulting at Xandr. You're all really welcome. And, you know, our whole panel is really going to be looking at the value chain. So it's wonderful to have so many great representatives of really all the key stakeholders in the value chain. Following on from Konstantin's remarks about timekeeping, I am being sensitive to this issue. And, you know, we have four great questions that we really want to deep dive into. So we're going to kick off straight away with our first question. Similar to the previous session, there will be a poll later. So for all you attendees, please do ask questions using the facility, and similarly, please participate in our poll. We're going to kick off with our first question, and that is concerning brand safety, ad fraud, and lack of transparency. And we know they undoubtedly impact on consumer trust and brand investment. So for each of our panelists, are we getting better as an industry? And what, in your view, is making a real difference? Stefan, I'm going to start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Suzanne. I do believe we are advancing. Probably we still have a lot of work to do, because when all of this started in 2017 or a bit earlier, 2016, when we found the dysfunctional brand safety, there are only a few maybe brands and agencies who are actually concerned. I have a feeling now everybody's on board, the entire chain, and you see some big brands actually working together now under the auspices of GARM, which is Global Alliance for Responsible Media, where brands and platforms are coming together to devise common standards, common definitions, which is you would say a baseline for what we need to do. Whether this is going to disappear, no. I think during the COVID-19 crisis, we saw that brand safety officer, which is colloquially now a term, it's a thing, actually were probably some of the most demanded and required people within their organizations. What we still have to do, really a lot, because while we think that some of the issues in social or in display are resolved, they're still there, but the new ones are coming up. So brands are investing in audio, in podcast, voice, in digital out of home, in every single one of these channels. They are, I like to call them new, but reinvented. Will bring new challenges in terms of brand safety, fraud, viewability, but even other compliance issues.
And Stefanie, would you share the Xandr perspective?
Yeah, I think as Xandr, obviously we sit on both sides of the supply chain, the buy side and the sell side with our SSP and DSP. So we take a quite broad view on brand safety. We're looking at what kind of inventory comes onto our platform, and once again, I think there's very much use in standardization. There's very much also a value to players that really specialize on these kind of services. So we're working with White Ops for like monitoring the traffic that is incoming, for example. When it comes on the buy side, obviously it's very important to ensure brand safety is custom to the campaign, and we see a lot of efforts towards kind of like getting smarter at applying brand safety measures, and maybe we'll talk about a few of them later on. But I think overall, when we look at what is the industry doing, we certainly haven't solved all the issues, but we've shown that we're willing to start to get going and to work together. And I think one of those examples is like the way that we dealt with the whole challenge around GDPR in 2018. Like we've really seen that even though it looked like 3 months before everything was happening, like nobody was like really like all set on what was going to change, but there was an effort to come up with a unified standard like the TCF. There was an effort to collaborate and to improve that standard going forward. So I think it's not about having a solution, but it's about being a formative part in these kind of initiatives.
Great. Andreas, from Zalando's perspective as a major brand and retailer, what is your view?
I'd like to echo the point that we are also on both sides of the divide, so to speak. Once acting as an advertiser ourselves for the Zalando retail brand. Second, offering our partners to advertise with us and on Zalando premises, such as the Zalando app. And here we do see that brand safety has been increasing as a driver for partners to play their brand stories on Zalando and engage with the consumer there. Now with GDPR coming stronger into play and trust being more important in the interaction with the consumer, there's another factor that is driving this trend towards the big platforms, including the commerce platforms for advertisers.
And Ben, you bring the perspective really of creating big picture, tech solutions for our whole industry. So I suppose really looking at all of the supply chain, what is the tech lab view of these issues? Has a difference been made, and really what is making a real difference?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. I think we are making significant progress for sure, and I would point to probably three things. I think that OpenRTB 3.0 and the AdCom model represents a pretty big shift and an important shift towards enabling a lot of transparency and verification features on top of the interoperability protocol that we have in place. And then, on top of that, we can see tremendous progress in terms of app ads and ads.txt adoption, sellers.json adoption. But I think there's a lot of other features that sit on top of the tools that the industry has created that really would pay huge dividends if we were able to kind of cooperate around interoperability and adoption of those standards. I'm thinking specifically of the sellers.json and ads.cert specifically, that provides a degree of authentication and a degree of verification of what's happening inside the supply chain that we just don't have right now. And I think that's really at the root of transparency and being able to understand brand safety and fraud at scale. When you can shine a light into those dark places, it creates a lot of opportunity to understand what's going on. And those tools really do help enable that. And so I would echo what Stefanie said earlier, that sometimes it's more of a cooperation problem than a technology problem. And I think we have the tools, it just requires prioritization, I think, of actually adopting them across the board, which is no small thing, to be clear. It's a hard thing to prioritize given other competing demands, but we do think that there's a solid technology foundation in place to help facilitate all these things.
Great. Oliver, do you think we are getting better as an industry? I think you're on mute. I think you might be on mute.
Okay, apologies for that.
No problem.
Yes, I do. I think it's clear we've got a long way to go still. But I think if you go back, 10 plus years to a time of blind ad networks and fraud all over the place, and a real lack of accountability in the sector. And then I was reflecting on this in Daniel's presentation, and you sort of see that growth over the past 10 plus years. That is a sign of confidence in the channel, and that's something that's been building as we as a sector come together and fix these issues. I would certainly point to the really good examples of that, be it tag around fraud, be it ads.txt, I think was a brilliant, rapid adoption through the value chain in order to sort of improve a very known issue around domain spoofing. Clearly, supply chain transparency is kind of the next big issue on the table. But I think what we've shown with those other initiatives is we can collaborate, we can get together as a sector and address these things. And I think that will inevitably need to happen now.
So some work done, but a lot more to do.
A lot more to do.
Good. Okay, and then really reflecting your individual places on the value chain, what are your views on the emerging roles in terms of the value chain, and can you predict some new future roles? And this time I'm going to start off with Stefanie.
Yeah, I think just going back to Oliver mentioning like the fragmented value chain that we've seen over the last couple of years, like we used to have so many companies coming up in the last years, which is a sign of how innovative this industry has been and how much We've added like new targeting features, new capabilities to the industry. So like if we're looking at the situation that we see right now, I think there's a lot of consolidation happening. So we see that basically some solutions have proven their business value, and they're either, like especially around targeting capabilities, they're either acquired by the buy or by the sell side. So we see audience providers or DMPs being picked up by agencies, or we see also around the first party cookie data, publishers getting more closer to owning their data and looking at data strategies that they can kind of like execute in a more autonomous way. So I think overall what we're going to see is that anytime we have like more pieces in the value chain, they generally add some specific value. They add some new capabilities. And over time, it's just like not easy to maintain a super fragmented chain. It's just very difficult to do all this partner management. So there's also some form of kind of like picking the right pieces that fit into your marketing strategy and that you need to have in one basket kind of. So I do expect a lot more consolidation overall, but I'm really keen to see more new solutions coming up and more actually innovation around things that were not thinkable 5 years ago. Like now we're talking about blockchain-based solutions. We're talking about different types of artificial intelligence just become cheaper to execute just because there's technological advancement. And I think there's more to come, but overall, there is less space to work with hundreds of partners. If we're thinking about, once again, like contracts and stuff, it's just too much work.
And Andreas, where do you think the key roles will emerge in terms of the value chain?
Let me give a perspective from the e-commerce side of things. And if you do advertising in e-commerce, one of the key areas where things will get different from an organization point of view is that with a larger share of digital in your overall sales portfolio for almost any brand, any retailer, you will be more pressed to be very clear about how you align across channels. So give an example, you're a brand, you sell on some platform, you have your own e-com somewhere, you have perhaps some wholesale relationship with some other retailer. And today these are typically very separate endeavors from a marketing perspective. And to bring these together will be one of the key areas of success factors. And this will have a host of new roles, starting from the measurement side of things, from a strategizing point of things, to how you design marketing calendars around this. This will have huge ramifications. And we are only just beginning to see the start of this.
And Oliver, from your perspective, where do you see the new roles and new opportunities?
So I think the biggest shift that we've seen is one of really awareness, particularly from brands. And what that's resulted in, of course, people talk a lot about in-housing, but that's not a black and white dichotomy. People really, what we're seeing emerge is actually a sort of four-way relationship with tech suppliers, with agencies, with brands, and with consultancies as well. And so we sort of see this increased awareness of what's happening through the media investment, how the ad tech stack is set up as a really positive thing overall, because that awareness is sort of shining a light through the value chain. I think the other one that I'd point to that I find very interesting, and it speaks a little to what Stefanie was saying, was this notion of sort of simplification of the stack, right? Is sort of, having lots and lots of suppliers. And one of the ways that we're seeing that emerge is really agencies and brands wanting to own their supply path. So really wanting to understand what is going through, striking new sorts of partnerships, either with sell-side vendors or with publishers directly, or building their own kind of pipes, as it were. And I think that's a very interesting shift in kind of the ownership of the supply path in the value chain as well. So I think those are probably the two bigger things that I've seen.
Okay, and so finally, and probably quickly on this, Stevan, and given that your own role is brand safety and digital risk, which is very much one of the most significant roles at the moment, can you predict some other roles? Where do you see new roles emerging?
I think what will happen is that because brand safety is increasingly considered to be a matter of even corporate social responsibility or ethics, for many brands, are you holding up to your corporate values? I believe that brand safety will slowly either merge with like ethics officer, which already exists in a lot of companies, ensuring that, you know, wherever it is that you invest is actually sustainable and ethical. And another part which is already happening is that there will be increasingly more and more a role that is particularly looking into quality media, which is what we are already doing. We just may not have people who have quality in their titles, but I think that is already a big trend that that's coming to life.
Great. Okay, so another very important issue and question for our panel right now, one that the whole industry is focusing on really. So in your view, how is our industry responding to the focus of the importance of first-party data? And of course, this is so significant given the ultimate end of third-party cookies. And going to start off with Ben, with your view, and IB Tech Lab, which is very involved, of course, in addressing this issue.
Sure, yeah. You kind of alluded to the fact, Suzanne, that anyone that has a direct relationship to a consumer first party is going to be in a position now to largely curate audience more so than they have been in the past. And so I think that the first thing that people think about is the role that publishers will play as a curator of audience more broadly for both direct sales and also as potentially as a source of addressability for others, for advertisers as well, who are also in this circumstance all becoming first parties as well. So I think that both brands and publishers are going to be in a position where they're starting to curate more customized audiences and activating them in the channels that are relevant to them. But I think also that we need to think about how these new players are describing their data and activating them more broadly. And we think that data transparency standards across the board and consistent way of labeling them is going to be super important across the board. But I think it's quite clear that they're going to play a much more kind of important role in making sure that there are accurately segmented and well-described audiences moving forward for everyone in the supply chain.
Oliver, where does Adform see solutions emerging from?
Well, I definitely echo what Ben said there about the fact that it's really the principals who own the consumer relationship who then have that gateway to that first-party data, and that in itself is a bit of a shift of power, as it were, within that value chain, which I think is an interesting part. But what we're seeing, I suppose, emerge is different types of solutions. So you've got very commercially driven solutions to how to make the most of that first-party data. Then you've got industry solutions, of course, Project Rearc or Digitrust, as in the past. And then you've got kind of the notion of publisher collectives, Ozone, NetID, and so forth, as ways to enable the transaction across that data and the targeting and so forth. And I think from our perspective, we certainly lean towards the industry-driven initiatives or the publisher sort of collective-driven initiatives, partly because of the neutral governance that can then sort of sit around those. So we're very much looking forward to seeing kind of what's coming out of Project Rearc and the future there, as well as obviously keeping an eye on the Google Sandbox and what's going to happen with that side as well. So.
Okay, so but the final question for panelists right now, before we have a look at attendee questions and hopefully be able to address some of those, this is a very important question, I think, for everybody, for the whole industry. You've seen blocklisting of coronavirus and other terms, and also, across all markets from Ireland, across Europe and the US, the direct impact and negative impact this has had on ad spend on quality content publisher sites. So really to ask you, how do you think brand safety strategies can address this problem? I'm going to start with you, Stefan, because this is your bread and butter, literally. So what would your advice be in this respect?
Well, we always, the first advice we always give to clients is to invest in quality. Our first defense line, I like to call it, is investing in highly viewable, brand safe, suitable, underpinned by third-party measurement and independent verification media. And what we saw is that during this crisis, brands, some of the brands particularly paid attention to the brand safety piece, believing that a lot of the things that was out there was particularly unsafe for their brands. And they have the right tool, but I think some of them finally realize what kind of impact that has on the broader ecosystem. What happened is that when we did actually some surveys internally, we realized that around 90% of our clients actually do not block all COVID-19 content, only the most sensitive stories. But you know, as I said, I think the quality as an issue will just actually not as an issue. It's not an issue. It's quality is a quality. Will only grow, and that's where it will be very interesting to see the competition that has been in the play. And it will be even more between social platforms and premium publishers.
Okay, Stefanie, what is the Xandr advice for clients in this respect?
Yeah, I think the point that was made about the kind of like different expectations that we put on social platforms and on the open internet are very relevant, because when we think about something like keyword blocking, it is certainly something that makes you feel like I'm ticking a box, I'm doing my work, I'm kind of like providing brand safe environment. However, a keyword only says you so much, or tells you so much about the content. And when we're talking about backing journalism and the importance of kind of like keeping a free open internet, and this internet needs to be financed. And I think what we're looking for is more sophisticated approaches towards brand safety. So possibly like looking at solutions that go beyond evaluating keywords, but more like looking at semantics. So we had this study earlier in the year where we managed to unblock up to 70% of blocked content with Mantis, which is an IBM Watson product, where basically there's like a different evaluation of content that is a bit more elaborate. And I think once again, there has been a bit of a stalling in innovation in brand safety. And I think we can look back and we can go back, especially in these situations, and just ask for more solutions and for more daring in trying to figure out different ways to achieve this customization. Because our pitch is everything about the right moment, the right person, the right price, but also like we can be more the right type of brand safety for each brand and for each publisher as well.
Okay, and Oliver, what is Adform's view in terms of assisting with this very significant problem for quality content publishers and really for the whole of our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what we saw was something of a knee-jerk reaction from a lot of brands in terms of pulling spend, and I suppose there are two sides to that. One was a nervousness around the quality or the type of content that they were around, and I think we saw fantastic work from people like Newsworks in terms of promoting exactly what Stefanie and Stevan were just saying, which is that it's absolutely vital to fund quality journalistic content, and I think that has played a really strong part, and we're very supportive of that. And then the second part was really around the creative side, where perhaps advertisers weren't ready with the right types of creative. So we've worked very closely with a lot of our clients to refine their messaging, and we've actually seen really creative examples of how, you know, typically a pandemic wouldn't be something that you would mention in a creative or talk about in a creative, but we've seen actually a real adaptation of the messaging to be sensitive, to have a CSR angle, to adapt to the situation. I think so. There's sort of two sides to this. The creative wasn't really ready. You know, people took a knee-jerk reaction, but actually working with clients, they're sort of adapting their strategies, both in terms of where they appear and what they're showing, really.
And from Tech Lab perspective, Ben?
Yeah, I think there's very much a role for standards to play here in the innovation that Stefanie kind of mentioned before, which I completely agree with. There needs to be much more, I think, granularity in how semantic analysis actually determines good versus bad, right? So it's very much a stark dichotomy right now based on a single keyword. And I think there's shades of gray that we can bake into a consistent labeling structure. And we think content taxonomy 2.2 potentially will be a good opportunity to bake in some of that nuance, so that publishers can actually communicate up through the supply chain the extent to which they think that this is brand safe versus not brand safe, while also addressing real world issues, real news that matter to people. And ultimately, brands need to understand that nuance as well, and kind of approach the problem understanding that they serve a very important role in funding content and services across the internet. So I think standards can play a role, but I think it also needs to be there needs to be a common mapping from the verification platforms that do the actual semantic analysis, and have that kind of trickle all the way back up in the supply chain to the behavior of the brands who are determining winners and losers in this scenario.
Okay, and everybody, I'm sure, can now see that we have a poll. Panelists are unable to participate in this, and we've heard your views anyway, but hopefully all the other attendees have. So please do vote. And Andreas, I'm just going to finish off on this question with Zalando's view in terms of, the challenges in terms of quality content publishers, and this issue in terms of blocklisting, key terms like coronavirus. What is your perspective in terms of the challenges really for that sector?
I would like to echo what has been said, that blocklisting can only be a stopgap measure, an interim quick solution until you adapt creative and messaging. After all, let's not be naive. Even if you are on pages that are not, plastered with COVID-19 editorial content, still it's on people's minds, and you have to be sensitive to the overall situation. It's simply the zeitgeist, and we have seen for our partners, but I'm also happy to share things like the sports from home topics that we've been pushing. These are messages that resonate in these times, and as long as they are authentic to who you are as a brand, they can go in and affect change positively in people's lives.
Excellent. Okay. So far, I think I'm just having a look to see if we have any questions in from attendees. So just bear with me one moment. And okay, there is one. Does the panel think the industry adapted quickly with the pandemic to mitigate any risks to operations and investments? So again, just very quickly, Stefan, could you just give us your first thoughts on that?
I think so. I think the industry did, and sometimes in terms of brand safety, even too much. Because as Oliver said, nobody saw it coming. I mean, we saw it coming in APAC, and then in Europe it just exploded overnight or within a week. So a lot of our companies already have lots of contingency plans, how to deal with this, and I do think we reacted properly. Some overreacted, but at the end of the day, I think we as the industry, we have a good reason to be satisfied with our reaction.
Okay, very good. Now we are running out of time, and I do want to give the poll results. So in terms of the question again, are we getting better as an industry in tackling key challenges like brand safety, ad fraud and transparency? So yes, most definitely was 26%, yes to some extent 63%, and no 10%. So a lot done, a lot more to do. And speaking of which, I really want to thank all my panelists for all they have done in terms of contributing and preparing for today. It's been my pleasure to moderate, and look forward to more great content and throughout Interact, and also a personal well done to Daniel Knapp on that fantastic piece of work, which is so useful for our whole industry. But thank you to my panelists. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.